We have Nana with us today in today's video. You'll be happy to know. So I'm in a different room today because I need to get the natural light, so hopefully it comes out okay, and yeah, the sound and all that is all right. Today I'm going to be giving 3 tips to someone who is newly diagnosed with MS, or kind of maybe 3 pieces of advice that I wish I knew at the beginning of my diagnosis. I was diagnosed with MS about 1.5 years ago. Nana's just ruining this for me. So I feel like I'm a good bit into my diagnosis. It's still relatively fresh and it definitely feels quite fresh, but I have learned a lot in the last 1.5 years. So these are my tips if you are someone who has just gotten diagnosed or a potential MS diagnosis, because sometimes it can take ages to get an MS diagnosis. So let's just get into it. So my first piece of advice is to take your time with every aspect of your life. So what I mean by that is, at the beginning of an MS diagnosis and even throughout an MS, your MS journey, you are more than likely going to be out from work quite a bit. I know for me, the first year of my MS diagnosis, I was in and out of work all the time. Like, I'd be out sick because I'd either have a relapse, or I'd be recovering from a relapse, or I'd be starting a treatment. So I was either like out from work or I was on reduced hours. My advice is just to take your time with, let's say, going back to work. The company is not going to collapse while you're off. Every single person is replaceable. So you not being in work is not going to cause the company to go bust. The company is going to survive without you being there. So don't rush trying to get back because you feel guilty, or because you feel like you should be working, or you feel like you don't need, like you're not entitled to all this time off. You absolutely are. The thing is, like, no one else, more than likely no one else in your work knows what you're going through, and knows how unwell you can be when going through a relapse, or even just, you might have had a bad experience with relapses, but even the fact that you've just kind of been told you have this diagnosis, it's terrifying and it's overwhelming. So just don't feel bad about being out sick from work, or don't try and rush back, because the thing is, you need to try and make sure that you are 100% better, because with MS you're so much more susceptible to becoming unwell or run down, and it's just, if you go back too soon you might then be out sick again, do you know, that sort of way. But I don't mean like take your time just with work, I mean like with every aspect, like even if it's socializing, being around friends. Even like for me, I think like after my first relapse I didn't drink for like 6 months, and like I know that doesn't seem like the biggest a deal, but I remember just being like, I was genuinely terrified to have a sip of alcohol because I was so afraid that it would remind me of having a relapse, because I was so dizzy after my first relapse that I was so afraid. Because you know the way if you do drink quite a lot and you get the spinnies, I was so afraid even if I had the tiniest sip that I would get that reminder. Don't feel the pressure to like go back to living a completely normal life. Like, you've just been diagnosed with this life-changing disease. Don't feel that you should be living your life the way you were before you had this diagnosis, or before you started having relapses. Even like coming to terms with the disease, it's going to take time. Do you know, it's not something that you can just accept overnight. So that is my first piece of advice. Take your time with, whether it's work, with socializing, with coming to terms with the disease, with different aspects of your life, even like different hobbies that you have. Don't feel bad that you're not doing all the things that you were doing before your diagnosis or your relapses, because things are different now. So, and like, that doesn't mean that you can't go back to doing all these things that you used to. And like, the thing is, like, you're more than likely you are going to go back to work, and you are going to do all your hobbies and all that jazz. It's more so just to give your body a chance to, one, recover, and even just your mental health to come to terms with what you have gone through. So that is my first piece of advice. So the second piece of advice is all around our feelings, and essentially what the advice is to literally feel every single feeling that comes up. And I know that sounds a bit obvious, but like, if you feel sad about this diagnosis and you need to cry, just let the tears out. If you're angry about it, be angry. Like, that is, it's okay to feel all these different emotions, and to feel sad one day, to be angry, to feel like you're actually coping with the disease. Because the thing is, it's a massive journey, and even like a year and a half into this diagnosis, there's still plenty of ups and downs. Don't be confused about like, how am I fine one day and then the next day I'm crying my eyes out, and then the next day I'm fed up, and then I'm angry, and then I'm pissed off. It's a roller coaster, and it is normal to feel all those different types of emotions. But my advice is to try not to suppress it. And I know people deal with emotions differently, I'm fully aware of that. But if you are able to just let it out, do. If you internalize it, you're kind of not dealing with the issue. And unfortunately, MS is with us for life. There isn't a cure for it, and it's not something that, you know, if you ignore it, it's going to go away. Unfortunately, it's with us for life. It's a very scary diagnosis, because majority of the time we're fine one day, and then all of a sudden we wake up with some form of a symptom, and we're just like, what the fuck, where did this come from, what is it? And it's terrifying, especially if you don't really know a huge amount about MS, or you don't know anyone with MS, and you're kind of like, what the fuck is going on, how does that happen? So it can be really, really scary. But avoiding those emotions is just pushing out the problem further and further and further down the line. Like I said, it is a journey, and it's not a small journey, but by avoiding all the different emotions that come with it, you're making the journey even longer. Unfortunately. And the thing is, majority of the people around you are more than likely not going to have a clue what you're going through. So don't feel like, oh, I shouldn't be upset like 6 months down the line after getting a diagnosis. The thing is, you've nothing really to compare it to. No one else really in your life now, unless you do actually know someone with MS. But no one else actually knows what you've gone through or what you are going through. So you've nothing really to compare it to. And even if you do know someone that's gone through it and they absolutely just kind of flew through it, that doesn't mean that you have to as well. Every person with MS is different. Everyone's MS is different. So your experience might not be what someone else has experienced or is experiencing. So don't feel bad or confused as to why one day you're grand, you think you've come to terms with it, and then the next day you're crying, and then the next day you're fuming, and then the next day you're fed up. It's a journey. Just let those feelings in, let them out, and try not to suppress them, because it's gonna make things difficult further down the line, let me tell you that much. Okay, my third and final piece of advice is never feel like you have to justify why you feel the way you feel, or even like your symptoms of MS. Never feel like you have to justify or like thoroughly explain how bad things are. I remember when I first started having relapses, I wanted people to know how bad things were, but I remember like I was just like overly trying to emphasize how bad things were, because I was trying to explain to people like what is happening to me during a relapse. But at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, okay, you can absolutely explain what's going on, and like in work you may have to have those conversations, depends what line of work you're in. But the thing is, more than likely the people around you don't know what you're going through. They're never going to fully understand what it feels like, and it's not your job to try and make them understand. They're never going to get it, and you should never ever feel like you have to explain to someone why you feel the way you feel. That's not their business. They don't need to understand it. Yes, absolutely, you can say I feel X, Y, and Z, but you should never justify why you feel like that. Like if you feel really, really shit about the whole situation, you don't need to try and make them understand, because they don't know what it is to get this diagnosis, and it's not really any of their business. If you feel like people just aren't nearly understanding, that's their issue. That's not your issue, and it's not your job to try and get people to understand. It's also not your job to try and educate people on your disease or your symptoms. Don't get me wrong, I am very open about my disease, and even at the very beginning of my diagnosis I was very open about it. I created an environment where people were comfortable asking questions, and that still stands with me. Like if someone was genuinely curious or was just asking about the disease in general or about it, how it affects me, I don't mind explaining it, because I want to raise awareness about the disease. But it isn't your job to educate people. Just because you have the disease doesn't mean that you have to try and educate people. That's not how it works. People can find the information online. So don't feel like people know you have this disease and, you know, you're their encyclopedia. That's not how it works. Just like, I know I've said it, like I'm very open about it, but I like speaking about it. And I know literally majority of people around me either had heard of MS but didn't know a huge amount about it, or they had absolutely never even heard of it at all. I felt like I was raising awareness about it, but that's who I am. That doesn't mean that you have to also do that. So never justify why you feel the way you feel. Those are your feelings, they're valid, and you don't need to explain to people why you feel those feelings. And you don't need to thoroughly go into detail of the symptoms that you have to try and make people understand why you're so unwell. That's not your issue to try and get them to understand. If they don't get it, fuck them. And it's not your job to try and educate them. If you want to, absolutely go hell for leather, but it's not your job to do that, and don't feel pressure to try and be this Wikipedia of multiple sclerosis, because you don't have to be. So those are my 3 pieces of advice. Take your time with everything in life when you are going through this diagnosis. Feel every single feeling that comes up. And 3, never justify why you feel the emotions that you feel or the symptoms that you feel, and it's not your job to educate people. That is all. I hope this video has been helpful to someone. Obviously, if you are going through this MS diagnosis, this journey, I know it's tough. And it feels like it's never ending, but things do get better. I didn't want that to be one of my tips, you know, things do get better, look on the bright side, because that's bollocks. That's not gonna really get you through your diagnosis. And I just feel like that's just useful information. Useless information. But hopefully these tips have been helpful to you, and obviously I'm very sorry if you are going through this diagnosis, because it's not easy. And I know it's terrifying, but we're warriors and we've got this. You'll be surprised at how strong you can be when you're going through something like this. Because at the end of the day, we have no choice when we go through something like this. But you'll be surprised about how strong you can be. Anyways, that's all for now, folks. If you like this video, you know the drill, give it a thumbs up. I do make other MS content. It's not my sole genre of my YouTube channel, but I do make videos here and there about MS, so if you are interested, hit that subscribe button. And if not, if you just think I'm a legend, you can hit that subscribe button. I make loads of other types of videos. But yeah, that's it. See you in the next video. Love yous.